Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of the Cooperation Tulsa Organizer Education Group. Tonight, we're going to be continuing our reading of Full Spectrum Resistance, Volume 1 by Eric McBay. I unfortunately will not be on camera this evening because I'm having technical difficulties. However, that's fine because most of this is just our voices anyway. So, welcome everybody who is attending and watching. Give me just a moment. I'm going to share this link around a little bit. It's been a couple weeks since we have been able to host it. We've just been having some troubles. One of the weeks I was sick, and I don't recall what happened the other week. Oh, yeah, the other week was my birthday. That's right. So, yeah, this is our first week back here in a little while, and unfortunately did not get the camera working in time. Give me just a moment, and we'll get started momentarily. Gabe and Zan, how y'all doing tonight?
I'm alright, dealing with some dust mites situation, but otherwise I'm okay.
I'm doing well. I've just got some artwork cooking up right now for Cooperation Tulsa, actually.
That's awesome. What is it?
So I compiled everything that Theo shot at the last bonfire. I took screenshots from all of the videos of different people that were there, and I've edited them all together in one big photo that looks very funny and mishmash right now, but I'm going to draw everybody that I've got pictured here to make a cool, really like unique poster for the bonfires.
Awesome. That's super cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I have no idea if it'll be ready for the next bonfire coming up, but I'm gonna do my absolute damnedest.
That's what's up. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can have it whenever we want. Just have to make sure there's no like burn advisory or anything.
Yes.
Anyway, so in chat here, we're just gonna count off our order. I'll go first. Who wants to go second? And so, Gabe, you want to read third?
Okay. Yep.
All right. So, yeah, just picking up where we left off, I said that we were on page 347 in the PDF. So I'll just continue from there. More than 500 students were killed by police and over 1,000 injured. According to Heidi Holland, the students were fearless in their confrontations with armed police and refused to back down. Quote, many held their parents responsible for the continuing iniquities of apartheid, declaring that virtually no protests had arisen from the older generation since the nationalists had introduced a state of emergency in 1960. Quote, it is our parents who have let things go on far too long without doing anything. They have failed, a Soweto youth told a newspaper reporter in the early months of 1976, end quote. The ANC was quick to offer training to the young militants, some of whom weren't even aware that the ANC was still active. Many young people left the country to receive training from MK cadres in exile. Some were very young. One 10-year-old became a legend when he approached the MK commanders and demanded to receive military training so that he could be infiltrated back into South Africa as an armed guerrilla. MK leader Oliver Tambo sat down with the boy for an afternoon and gently convinced him to wait until he was a little older. Youths may have started the uprising, but after seeing their children in the line of fire, parents and other adults joined in the fight. The organizational structure established over decades by the ANC was ready to combine with a fierce new generation of militants. Holland, quote, the result was unprecedented grassroots support and a countrywide infrastructure of resistance, which, though lying apparently dormant while activists adapted to the state's oppressive laws, would surely rise again, end quote. the ANC and other groups escalated their attacks on the apparatus of apartheid as an attitude of militancy grew among the people at large. MK did not limit their attacks to sabotage, but made use of directed political violence. If they were to succeed this time, the ANC had to avoid the problem of infiltrators and informers that had nearly destroyed MK in 1963. MK and other anti apartheid militants put two main measures in place to avoid this problem: better internal security and dramatic deterrence against informers. According to Davis, no matter how much military force the state has available, quote, a counterinsurgency war cannot be waged successfully without the ability to identify the enemy, locate his internal bases, and determine where he plans to hit next. In the years, or end quote. In the years following the Soweto uprising, the ANC, quote, implemented a screening and internal watchdog system that effectively shielded most of its compartmentalized underground from penetration, end quote. At that time, Davis wrote, the ANC, quote, used coercion to reduce the government's formerly abundant supply of informants. Highly publicized executions of suspected spies, assassinations of state witnesses, and continuous warnings against collaboration through the Black community have helped blind the police to Black underground activities. The ANC is not the only beneficiary. A large new stratum of local political activists involved in allied organizations has emerged across South Africa. It is safe to say that only a minority are known to police intelligence. Any draconian campaign of detentions and arrests would net the police a large number of innocent victims, thereby helping to inflame the Black public without necessarily crippling the underground, end quote. Attacks against collaborators were a powerful deterrent, but they were also gruesome and sometimes unjust. Some killings were spontaneous witch hunts outside the ANC structure. In 1985, 300 suspected collaborators were killed in this fashion, many of whom were presumably innocent. Next.
These killings were sometimes provoked by people's courts, which, despite their legalistic name, were often little more than mobs. A common means of execution for those believed to be informers was the horrific practice of neck lacing. A tire filled with gasoline was put over the neck of the accused and then ignited, burning them to death. This ghastly method of execution was condemned by the ANC. As the 1980s progressed, the frequency and scale of militant actions forced the South African government to operate under a perpetual state of emergency. The country was finally becoming, as the ANC had long hoped, ungovernable. And this time the government was unable to penetrate and dismantle the underground organization. What's interesting to me is just how suddenly the government capitulated. In 1989, Heidi Holland wrote that, quote, at least a decade is expected to pass before Afrikaners are prepared to negotiate anything substantive in the way of political rights for Blacks, end quote. But within a few months of her book's publication, the apartheid government gave in. On January 2nd, 1990, the state removed their ban on the ANC and other oppositional political groups after 40 years of underground activity. Subsequently, MK agreed to a suspension of violent attacks, and leaders from the ANC and allied groups were able to negotiate an end to apartheid. In 1994, the country held the first real elections in South African history, and the ANC won by a landslide, forming a government that still holds as of this writing. Next section, the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party, BPP, is among the most powerful revolutionary movements in American history. Its members challenge white supremacy, the poverty produced by capitalism, and the racist violence of the police and the prison industrial complex. At its peak, circa 1970, the BPP had thousands of active members and offices in 68 cities. But its success and its militancy made it the target of violent repression as part of COINTELPRO, and its large-scale recruitment also brought in people with misogynistic tendencies. Founded in 1966, the Black Panther Party used a wide variety of tactics and mobilization methods. They armed themselves openly as a deterrent to police violence and patrolled their neighborhoods for signs of police abuse. If they saw a person being mistreated or arrested, they would show up fully armed and loudly proclaim that person's legal rights. But they also ran educational initiatives, breakfast and food distribution programs, health clinics, and other survival programs. The story of security in the Black Panther Party is a tale of extremes. On one hand, the Panthers, most of whom had been on the receiving end of state violence their entire lives, understood that security was central to resistance organizing. They recognized that in a large, serious, and militant group, security must be taught and enforced. It can't be left up to individual members alone, because the chain of security is only as strong as its weakest link. But some in the Panther leadership and security groups misuse their power and violently abuse their colleagues. We can learn a lot about security from the history of the Black Panthers, both through their successes and their mistakes. Next.
In his personal history of the Black Panther Party, former Panther Flores A. Forbes discussed security at length. On one hand, there was a high degree of secrecy. When Forbes was appointed BPP armorer, he noted that only a handful of other members in the party even knew the position existed. Security was a high priority, sometimes to the point of obsession. Forbes writes security was 50 to 75% of a member's focus in the BPP. Forbes explains that security was enforced by mostly unaccountable goon squads who would interrogate people and mete out punishments. If a person asked the wrong questions or breached security, they might be mudholed, beaten up, after which they would often leave the party. Early in Forbes' time, the Black Panthers, a goon squad, lined members of his chapter up against a wall, making, quote, making all kinds of charges, throwing out words like shirking one's responsibility, practicing a liberalism, and every other kind of counter-revolutionary act that a Panther could be charged with, end quote. Some members were beaten then and there in front of the entire group. Forbes writes that a goon squad's ostensible purpose, quote, was to whip people into shape and to get them to perform their jobs better. Now, I don't believe it was effective, but then I didn't know what to think, end quote. As counterintelligence force or moral example, the goon squads were a disgrace. They functioned through intimidation rather than intelligence. Intelligence gathering. Forbes believes that the goon squads became a collecting pool for the most psychologically damaged and abusive members of the BPP, and their position gave them the power to exercise violence whenever they pleased. The goon squads, rather than increasing the security or safety of the BPP, terrorized its members. Members could always be afraid of punishment, regardless of whether they were doing right or wrong. And since the party lacked clear rules about what was appropriate to ask or discuss, the goons could punish people on almost any pretext. Forbes was later a judge on an internal BPP, Board of Methods and Corrections, tasked in part with curbing acts of violence or aggression inside the party. Most of the people who caused problems were members of the security cadre. Previously, the accused had been able to shirk accountability by claiming that they could not discuss the details of their alleged crime because it had to do with secret BPP operations. Forbes and his co-judge eventually managed to curb much of their random internal violence, in part by refusing to accept their excuses. But with leaders like Huey Newton, who came to spend much of his time in a violent cocaine-induced haze, people lower in the hierarchy could only do so much to combat systemically abusive power. Recall how Newton ordered the severe beating of a woman overseeing survival programs. Armed groups have to set clear boundaries for the use of violence and be able to enforce them. Such groups attract people with a capacity for violence. If recruits aren't screened and if abuses aren't stopped immediately, an abusive culture will become systemic. If it doesn't, armed militants can quickly destroy popular support by abusing regular people. This was something that Amilcar Cabral and the PAIGC took very seriously, as I discussed. The Maquis, the armed parties of the rural French resistance, had similar problems. Some self-described Maquis had their own internal discipline to prevent banditry. There were bandits who simply posed as Maquis in order to prey on the peasantry. The real Maquis would execute them. Next.
Not only did the BPP fail to screen out the indiscriminately violent, they sometimes sought them out on purpose for political reasons. Originally a Maoist group, the BPP was heavily influenced by Marxist analysis. One of the demographics the Panthers were especially interested in were people Marx called the lumpen proletariat, which in his words was made up of the refuse of all classes, including swindlers, confidence tricksters, brothel keepers, rag and bone merchants, beggars, and other flotsam of society. At the risk of overgeneralizing, I'll note that some BPP leaders saw the lumpen proletariat as a group with little to lose, already inclined to break the law or use violence. The Panthers had high hopes for lumpen proletariat and pursued them vigorously in recruitment. Some historians consider this approach a serious error. Curtis J. Austin writes, quote, "One of the more serious mistakes the party made was its reliance on a justifiably disgruntled but grossly underprepared or unprepared segment of the Black community to bring about significant social change," end quote. He adds, quote, "This was especially true because a minority within this group had a propensity for violence and hot-headedness. Allowing those members easy access to the organization meant the BPP essentially condemned itself to failure," end quote. Part of this is selection failure. People inclined to uncontrolled violence aren't well suited to being in serious resistance groups. And part is training failure to ensure that recruits stay on task. It's also an organizational issue. The Black Panther Party should have been organized in a way that made it more resistant to problems caused by bad recruitment. But the Black Panthers made a major organizational mistake. They lacked a proper firewall. Austin writes, quote, "One of the group's most egregious mistakes early on was allowing members who worked selling papers and doing other public activities to engage in arm expropriations and other more dangerous illegal activities," end quote. Many members were part of both above ground and underground wings. According to Sundiata Akoli, quote, "Party members who have functioned openly in the BPP offices or organized openly in the community by day might very well have been the same people who carried out armed operations at night. This provided the police with a convenient excuse to make raids on any and all BPP offices or members' homes under the pretext that they were looking for suspects, fugitives, weapons, and or explosives," end quote. Another former Panther, Sheba Haven, recalled that, quote, "We didn't have any distinction between the political and the military. That was our problem," end quote. The Black Liberation Army, founded in 1971 mostly by former Black Panthers, did serve as a fully underground organization. Austin observes, give me a sec. Austin observes that the lack of a partition between above ground and underground sections made it easier for enemies to infiltrate the party and to undermine it. While it's clear that this mistaken policy emerged from the inexperience of party leaders and rank and file, there should have existed some mechanism to check and balance the group's more obvious shortcomings, end quote. The lack of a firewall also increased the effectiveness of COINTELPRO operations. It's worth noting, however, that COINTELPRO was not just interested in the BPP's more clandestine or underground operations. Their above-ground social aid initiatives, like the Free Breakfast for Children program, were targeted by the FBI, who ordered infiltrators to sabotage food and equipment. Quote, Contrary to popular belief, suggests Austin, the Panthers' willingness to use guns to defend themselves and the black community is not what the government feared most. The government knew full well that on any day and at any time it could defeat the Panthers' ragtag army. End quote. Next.
Austin continues, quote, "It was much more difficult, however, to keep the BPP from organizing blacks to fight against oppression. Federal and local police attacked the breakfast program so vehemently because the Panthers used it to recruit and to indoctrinate community people with its philosophy of self-reliance and armed struggle. To achieve its goal, government agencies had not only to destroy Panther facilities and supplies, but to arrest, beat, imprison, and sometimes kill those responsible for making the free breakfast for children program work." End quote. Even if you are nonviolent, once your activism becomes effective, they will try to crush you. There are at least 3 major reasons for the demise of the Black Panther Party. They all have to do with organization and security. One major problem was the group's various internal breaks, schisms, and sectarianism, exacerbated by COINTELPRO through anonymous warning letters and threats. Some of these internal schisms stemmed from legitimate grievances and power imbalances, such as the divisions caused by endemic sexism. There was also a major split in the party between a faction led by Huey P. Newton, which focused on community service and self-defense, and one led by Eldridge Cleaver, which favored an immediate campaign of armed confrontation and attacks. The FBI also encouraged such splits, and the Black Panther Party had virtually no counterintelligence capacity to deal with COINTELPRO. A second major factor was the arrest of large numbers of members, especially among the leadership. These arrests were caused in part by infiltration and lack of a firewall. These arrests led in turn to expensive trials, draining the party coffers. And the numerous high-profile arrests deterred potential recruits from joining the BPP. This, combined with losses due to conflict, meant that the party began to die by attrition. A third major factor was co-optation of the cause. In some ways, the Black Panther Party was a victim of its own success. Those in power were forced to recognize that BPP social programs were important and necessary, not for humanitarian reasons, but to avoid social unrest. So many BPP social programs were co-opted or duplicated by state services. Of course, the co-opted programs were depoliticized and, instead of radicalizing the clients, were designed to sap support from the BPP. The last leader of the BPP and the first woman leader was Elaine Brown, a longtime member who attempted to stave off the group's collapse while addressing internal problems like sexism. She wrote about these efforts and her history with the party in her memoir, A Taste of Power. Unfortunately, the deep-seated challenges facing the group were too much, and it disintegrated in the late 1970s. Next section, the Weather Underground. Though it existed at roughly the same time, the Weather Underground offers a very contrasting example to the Black Panther Party. The BPP achieved its success because it was able to embed itself in the Black community, to recruit and radicalize widely. But its lack of security protections contributed to its downfall. The Weather Underground, a much smaller organization, deliberately set itself apart from above-ground organizations with mixed results. Weathermen was founded as an above-ground organization in 1969, after radical leaders and Students for a Democratic Society split from others in the group. The Weathermen organized its membership into collectives, which were meant to act as training centers in which members would break their existing social bonds and form new bonds with the collective. Unfortunately, their methods of integrating new members became deeply problematic, even abusive. Upon joining a collective, members gave up all their personal possessions and assets and donated everything to the group. But material possessions were only the beginning. The Weathermen wanted to get rid of the emotional bonds and relationship they considered possessive. One undesirable behavior was monogamy, which leadership felt undermined the collective by privileging one relationship above the relationship to the group. So they instituted a smash monogamy campaign, which involved the forced separation of existing romantic couples and the mandatory rotation of sex partners in a manner determined by the leadership. Men with more power in the organization sometimes used this to arrange partnerships with women they desired. People with persisting emotional attachments to a single person were castigated for being counter revolutionary. This misogynistic arrangement has been criticized extensively by former members of the Weathermen, women in particular. Next.
The collectives also used critical self-criticism sessions, roughly derived from Maoist practices in China. In his book, Bringing the War Home, Jeremy Varon writes that, quote, the Weathermen used to practice to confront and root out their racism, individualist, and chauvinist tendencies in tone and substance. The sessions were part political trial, part hazing, part shock therapy, part exorcism, and, in a word used by more than one former member, part brainwashing. At their most intense, collectives singled out individuals for criticism and then berated them 5, 7, a dozen hours or more without a break about their about their flaws. Though they were designed to break down barriers among members, the effect of the sessions was to enhance suspicions and rivalries within the group and to suppress fears and doubts. Rowlett described the CSC as a vicious tool to disgrace people into accepting collective discipline. Bernardine Dorn wondered years later, I don't know if there's a good Maoist somewhere, but the Maoism that we adopted was stupid and lethal. When the Weathermen went underground in January 1970, they carried out a phase of consolidation. Suspected informers, or those considered to have less than total commitment, were purged from the organization. Over half the membership was lost. Only one documented informer, Larry Grathwohl, made it through the purges by pretending to take an LSD tab as part of an attempt to make him crack. After the purges, the group had about 150 members. Though there was no official roster of membership, the accidental detonation of a bomb being built in a New York townhouse, which killed 3 members of the group, accelerated the organization's conversion into the Weather Underground. The purges were surprisingly effective at protecting the organization. The FBI was unable to locate most of the underground members and eventually, in need of an arrest to make it look like they were actually accomplishing something, used Grathwohl to help capture 2 members. In the process, Grathwohl inadvertently blew his cover. Ron Jacobs describes the post-purge structure. Local collectives in specific towns and cities no longer existed. Instead, members organized themselves into cells of 3 or 4 or 5 and people and spread out across the country, with most of the cells located on the coasts. Of the several hundred members who had participated in the Days of Rage, only a couple of hundred remained. A smaller cell size, like the one used by the Weather Underground, made it harder for the government to arrest many people if one cell was compromised. Of course, it also increased the communications and organizational overhead. Intercell communication, notes Jacob, was dependent on sympathetic above-ground supporters, some of whom were Weather members who did not wish to go underground. Those people functioned as auxiliaries. Next.
Jacobs continues, quote, meetings were arranged secretly with the use of code words and names, and mailboxes registered under false names. Each cell was committed to armed action and was instructed by the Weather Bureau to come up with a list of potential targets. The list was relayed verbally to the Weather Bureau, which would discuss the merits and disadvantages of each target. End quote. The Weather Bureau was the Weather Underground's central administration cell, the main command entity in a highly decentralized and compartmentalized organization. Weather's organizational security was excellent. They also took operational and communication security very seriously. Quote, little was committed to paper since anything written down was potentially incriminating evidence should the police discover the location of a weather house. Due to the decentralized structure of the organization, it was rare for one cell to know of another's plans, end quote. Life underground offered increased security, but it was often tedious and anxious. Every traffic stop was a white-knuckle experience. The most basic logistical tasks became difficult. Varon writes, quote, simply surviving as a clandestine group was a great challenge, which required the procurement of false IDs for each of the 4 dozen or so underground members, the use of elaborate codes and decoys to arrange meetings, frequent shifting between safe houses, and the raising of money, end quote. All that said, the Weather Underground security measures were highly effective at protecting them from capture. Varon observes, quote, the weathermen proved extremely elusive. In an internal memo, the FBI explained that they are intelligent and highly organized. Their extremely sensitive security consciousness has to date virtually precluded the possibility of agent infiltration. The memo also noted that the weathermen did not seem susceptible to a financial approach. A $100,000 reward offered in connection to the 1971 Capitol bombing produced nothing. The FBI was additionally distressed that 2 members chose to stay underground even after federal indictments were lifted against them in 1973. One weatherman, Howie Machtinger, was arrested in September 1973, but quickly jumped bail to rejoin the underground, defiantly explaining his decision in a letter to a radical newspaper, end quote. Above ground auxiliaries, the only people in the organization who were accessible to the authorities, were frequently harassed or surveilled. Jacobs notes, quote, paradoxically, while Weather's above ground supporters were subject to continual harassment and threats, the fugitives themselves moved about with minimal interference from the law. As they related in a letter in the last supplement to the Whole Earth catalog, we do move around freely. Even if there was a brush with the police because of a traffic stop, say, their false identifications were effective enough so that no suspicions were aroused, end quote. Next.
The FBI, desperate to make progress, issued warrants and went so far as to increase their 10 most wanted list to 16 to accommodate Weather Underground suspects. In an attempt to deal with their failure to infiltrate the underground, the FBI created a deep cover program called Spectar to track down members of the Weather Underground and other leftist radicals. This program was not very successful, in part because some of the deep cover operative began to sympathize with their quarry, even abandoning their missions. One operative, Krill Payne, eventually tracked down a fugitive couple deep in the Canadian wilderness, but upon finding that they were relatively content in raising a child, simply let them be. All in all, the Weather Underground's approach to security was nearly watertight. Most members of the Weather Underground avoided long prison sentences. When leaders like Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn surfaced after a decade underground to turn themselves in, many of their charges were dropped because the state had broken so many of its own rules trying to gather evidence about them, and because they refused to testify against each other. But their deliberate isolation was also an obstacle to movement building. Weather's radical posturing at times alienated potential allies like the BPP. Weather became so isolated that it overestimated the potential for immediate revolution among the population at large. This made it almost impossible for them to devise a plausible revolutionary strategy and to grow after major geopolitical shifts like the end of the war in Vietnam. Any underground group must negotiate the sometimes conflicted need for security with the need to stay connected with above ground movements and sympathizers. Next section, security and the Green Scare. The Green Scare offers some of the most current and most complex lessons on security for activists. The Green Scare, named after the Red Scare of the mid 20th century, is a loose constellation of cases involving radical environmental or animal rights causes. Those affected have, those affected have worked both above ground and underground, and the tactics used against them range from infiltrators to grand jury harassment to prosecution under post 9/11 terrorism laws. Some of these groups attracted repression because of the scale of their actions. One group discussed caused something like 80 million of damage to environmentally destructive corporations, an economic impact that few above ground organizations have achieved. Groups like the Environmental Liberation Front, ELF, and the Animal Liberation Front, ALF, became increasingly active in the 1990s and onward, partly because sabotage had proved a very effective tactic, and partly so that activists could protect themselves from attacks that had targeted successful above ground activists like Judy Berry. Repression against environmental militants has been particularly severe for those who straddle the line of above ground and underground. That repression includes malicious prosecution for above ground speech. Consider the case of Rod Coronado, a longtime indigenous activist who had worked with or spoken for the ALF/ELF, the Above Ground Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and Earth First. Coronado spent years in prison for various underground actions, but is now committed to above ground action. While giving a public lecture in 2006, he answered an audience question about how he had built an incendiary device for an action a decade before. Though he had already been convicted and served time for that action, Coronado was arrested and charged for supposedly demonstrating the use of an incendiary device. He served a year in prison. He was released in 2008, but in 2010 he was sentenced to another 4 months in prison for parole violation after accepting a Facebook friend request from Earth First co-founder Mike Roselle. Another group, the Shack 7, ran a website as part of the Above Ground campaign to stop Huntington animal cruelty, to shut down Huntington Life Sciences, Europe's largest animal testing laboratory. Their campaign was highly effective, as I'll discuss in Chapter 11 Actions and Tactics. It was that effectiveness that caused them to be prosecuted during the Green Scare and sentenced to prison time. Here, though, I'm going to focus on underground organizations. They have involved the most serious actions and also the most serious breaches of security. I'll outline a few cases and then look at what they have in common. Next.
Trey Arrow, Environmental Arson, 2001. The Arrow began his activist career above ground in Oregon. In July 2000, he climbed a U.S. Forest Service building in Portland and spent 11 days on a tiny ledge, eventually helping to reverse a plan to log near Eagle Creek. In October of 2001, during an anti-logging protest in a large hemlock tree, Arrow fell 60 feet. He broke his pelvis and multiple ribs, also receiving a concussion. Those two events gained considerable public attention, but between them, two underground actions also took place. Arsons at gravel and logging companies which caused $250,000 of damage in April and June of 2001. Arrow was indicated for these arsons in 2002 after being implicated by Jacob Sherman, a 21-year-old student who participated in the arsons and who also pointed the finger at two others, Angela Cesario and Jeremy Rosenblum. The story goes like this. Sherman borrowed his mother's car for an arson and left suspicious dirt and gas smells in the vehicle. Sherman's father called the police, who did nothing. Federal agents only got involved, according to the FBI and the Earth First, because Sherman bragged to not just one, but two girlfriends about committing the arsons. One girlfriend reported it to her father, a deputy state fire marshal. Although the police didn't have information about the other three involved, Sherman identified them all under interrogation, compromising the entire group. Arrow, on the other hand, refused to cooperate or inform when arrested. Both Cesario and Rosenblum cooperated with authorities when arrested. Trey Arrow fled to Canada when he was indicted and was not captured until 2004, when he was arrested trying to shoplift a pair of bolt cutters for use in dumpster diving. People working underground have to avoid minor non-political crimes to keep a low profile. Jeffrey Lewis and Craig Marshall, burned SUVs, 2000. In another case, activists Jeffrey Lewis and Craig Marshall burned and damaged 3 light trucks at a car dealership in 2000. Unbeknownst to Lewis and Marshall, they were being followed that night by undercover police because of rumors in Eugene of a big, secret anarchist party. The police knew that Lewis and Marshall were part of the Eugene anarchist scene and hoped that the two could be followed to the kegger. The police were not following them because of any link to the underground or because police thought the two were planning arson. In fact, the police lost track of them during the night and didn't actually see them in action. Only after the fire was reported to a dispatcher were Lewis and Marshall's located and arrested. On searching Lewis' residence, the police found bolt cutters as well as incense sticks, thread, wooden matches, and other materials matching those used in another attempted arson. Marius Mason, biotech arson, 1999. Yet another case Yet another case is that of activists allegedly behind a 1999 anti-genetic engineering arson at Michigan State University, Marius Mason, then known as Mari, Stephanie Foltz, Aaron Berthwick, and Frank Ambrose. The FBI had taken the DNA samples from suspects without positive results. The case went nowhere until Frank Ambrose turned the others in nearly a decade after the action. According to the Kalamazoo Gazette, Ambrose became an FBI informer in 2007, a few months after making a critical mistake. He dumped personal records, writings, a gas mask, an M80 explosive, and other possessions in a Detroit area trash bin. A man foraging for scrap cardboard called police, and the FBI raided Ambrose's home. He not only turned on the other 3 involved, including his former spouse, Mason, but according to court records, quote, traveled outside the state 7 times to gather intelligence and record conversations, end quote. Again, only a single person in the group, Marius Mason, refused to cooperate when arrested. Next.
All right. So I think we'll have time for me to read, and then I'll be the last reader, and we'll move on to the discussion section of this session. Eric McDavid, The Sacramento 3, Conspiracy Entrapment, 2006. Perhaps the most absurd case is that of Eric McDavid, Zachary Jensen, and Lauren Weiner, who were arrested and charged with conspiracy in 2006 for discussions they had with an undercover operative, in which they talked about possibly planning ELF-style actions. According to the Civil Liberties Defense Center, this quote-unquote charge was based on the work of Anna, an 18-year-old woman who was employed by the FBI and paid at least $65,000 to fabricate a crime and entrap McDavid and his friends, end quote. Information presented at trial suggested that Anna had to work very hard in order to goad the others into a conspiracy. McDavid's co-defendants both turned and agreed to testify against him, despite the fact that McDavid and the others didn't actually commit any of the crimes the FBI operative attempted to push them into doing. Like Lewis and Mason, the Sacramento Three, figure 9C, were done in by a single informer, but this informer had been an employee of the FBI from the beginning. According to the CLDC, quote, testimony of Anna at trial indicated that she was the prime mover in the sabotage conspiracy, which had not reached consensus on a target, furnishing funds, accommodation, and other resources to the trio, keeping the group together and constantly advocating for criminal activity that the defendants would otherwise have been unlikely to engage in, end quote. As in Arrow's group, only one person, McDavid, refused to cooperate with the authorities. Operation Backfire, multiple actions, 1996 to 2001. The largest and most famous of the Green Scare cases involves 19 different people sought by the FBI for a string of actions between 1996 and 2001. The FBI called it, quote, Operation Backfire. Two of the group's biggest actions were the destruction of a slaughterhouse used to kill wild horses and the arson of a nearly completed resort in Vail, Colorado. Their total damages were allegedly in the range of $80 million. Holy fucking shit. Police investigators were never able to find any evidence linking anyone to those actions. The group responsible went silent and, unknown to the police, disbanded and dispersed around the United States. With no leads, police floundered for years until they decided to bluff someone into confessing and collaborating. As the Civil Liberties Defense Center notes, the case was originally cracked not by law enforcement efforts, but solely by a single informer, Jacob Ferguson, a heroin addict and lifelong arsonist and petty criminal, end quote. After recruiting Ferguson, the FBI gave him a wire and flew him around the country where he pretended to run into old friends by coincidence. He would then try to chat them up about the good old days. Unprepared and unsuspicious, his former colleagues spoke to him. Using details from Ferguson and from the conversations, the FBI prepared a string of indictments under the codename Operation Backfire. In December 2005, the first 7 people were arrested. Chelsea Gerlach, Daniel McGowan, Stanislaus Meyerhoff, William Rogers, Kendall Tankersley, Darren Thurston, and Kevin Tubbs. Rogers died in prison, an apparent suicide. Several others began to cooperate with the FBI. Meyerhoff almost immediately upon arrest. Only McGowan refused to cooperate or inform on the others. With the new information from Ferguson and the cooperating defendants, the FBI went after a second group in the quote-unquote Oregon indictment. So I think this is probably a good place for us to stop for the day. I'll just take note that we're on page 368 in the PDF. 368. All right. So as we move into the discussion section of this, I wonder if anybody has any immediate thoughts. I mean, there were a bunch of things I was thinking about as we were reading it, but I wonder if anybody has anything that comes to mind just to get our conversation started.
Nothing like particularly, but I do think it's very interesting learning over and over again, keep your mouth shut. Just you know, you got to live to learn, right? They tell you these things, but so many before us have fallen greatly.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that stood out in this. One of these is something I note in A Modern Anarchism, and that is what the FBI saw as the greatest threat of the Black Panthers wasn't that they were armed. It was actually the breakfast programs. To me, this is really just emphasizes the importance of, prefiguration, of creating alternative structures to serve people's needs. It's great to be armed, but unless you have like a truly vast group of people who are armed, you're not going to compete with the state. Instead, the greatest thing you can do is build alternatives, find those places where the state is not providing for the people, and then figure out how to provide those things for the people.
Absolutely. It's clear that self-defense is much, much more important than creating our own like mini military. It's a laughable idea.
What about you, Zan? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I like many thoughts. But like one of the things that is jumping now is and I think people are kind of coming around to understanding that much more than a few years ago, which is that even if you're not doing any underground activities, you can and can very well be targeted by the state. And so security becomes like a security culture becomes important, like at any level of activism, even though the state can then use it against you. It's like, oh, they were in a signal group together, and then that's a sign of a crime apparently. But yeah, it's like this ramping up the repression of any kind of dissenting activities. And like before, I feel like we saw a lot of what they're describing here of like entrapment. Like the RCMP in Canada has also done that. Like, yeah, basically pressuring people to commit crimes uh and then arresting them and like creating from scratch and then being like, oh, look, we're arresting people, we're protecting people. And then now it's like they don't even bother doing that. They just arrest people from dissenting. So yeah, it's lots of lesson here for security because things are dire for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this series of passages that we're reading here really focused a lot around security culture, and the failures of security culture. One thing that really strikes me here is that, the BPP was too lax on the firewall between their above ground and their below ground, to the degree where there was basically not a firewall. Like the same people doing the above ground stuff were the same people doing the below ground stuff, which was, disastrous. And then by contrast, you have the weathermen who were so strict, they basically got nothing done. They basically nothing really was achieved. They just did a bunch of kind of like acts of destruction, and they never really achieved any large things with their organization. So I don't think, the takeaway is that you have to have an above ground and a below ground, and you have to have a firewall between them to keep both parties safe. You can't just go all above ground. You can't just go all below ground. If you go all below ground, you just disappear. You just disappear off the map. Nobody even knows you're there, or if they do, you're like a dangerous guerrilla sect, not like a revolutionary organization. And if you go all above ground, well, that doesn't protect you, right? Like that does not protect you. You can be all above ground and they will still attack you. Like we saw this in the Stop Cop City movement, where there were people whose job was just running bail funds, but it didn't matter that they were just running bail funds. That did not protect them, So it's like, if the state really wants to get you, they probably just are going to figure out some way to get you. You want to follow best practices, mostly just to make it hard for them. Like that's really what it boils down to. There's nothing you can do that keeps you utterly protected, but there's lots of things you can do that help you be more protected. Yeah, that's just something that occurred to me.
It seemed like the Weathermen were more of a sex cult than anything. I feel like they were really just trying to keep their freaky shit underground, if anything. That's why they were so secretive.
I'm glad you remembered that, because I remember when we were reading that part, I was like, what the, what is this?
I was, yeah,
They were
I
like,
was sitting
you
there
have
like,
smash monogamy, let me fuck your girlfriend.
yeah.
That was
I
wild.
wonder why they were so secretive.
That was that was crazy
But isn't it
stuff.
hilarious that they were the most protected out of everyone, the sex cult? That's so funny. We
Honestly
got a
though,
thing
I
or
mean,
two to learn.
their operational security was really fucking good. I mean, they were really
Yeah, I'm
smart about.
definitely interested.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'm definitely interested in learning more about their operational security systems and what they had in place, and maybe how those can be improved upon and made more fluid and easy.
Yeah, I think that the difficulty is that what I've been kind of taking away from all of this is that the better your operational security is, the more you end up kind of separated from the movement, separated from the people, underground, and in tiny cells. And
Right, you become bubbled.
you become these little tiny bubbles. Yeah. And like the optimal number is like 3 to 5 people in each cell, and that's just, god, that is, number one, just not that many people, but number two, it's like, now imagine you have like hundreds or even thousands of people in your
Mm.
network, and they're all divided into 3 to 5. That just, it's a nightmare to coordinate, like coordinating that is so difficult. And so then what you have to do is you have to develop these kind of like broad imperatives where you're like, these are targets, try to act on those targets, and then you just hope that people don't step on each other's toes in the process. So in order to become illegible to the state, you have to become less effective in a lot of ways. You become more effective in not getting crushed, but you become less effective in organizing anything that could actually like revolutionize society.
Right, you're trying to actually meet your goals, not only just survive.
Exactly. So the way I look at it is you break into a cell structure out of sheer survival. That's what it is, right? You just, if you have to survive, and or you're literally just in guerrilla war with the government. Like if you're just in a guerrilla context where you are just trying to break into pieces so that you can survive and then strike back over and over,
Right.
then that's, you just have to break into a cell structure.
Right. So what you're kind of describing here is like a temporary like I'm imagining like a cloud that like ends up needing to rain, right? Like we have to separate to protect ourselves, and then we're going to form into a puddle underneath, but eventually we're going to rise again and be a cloud.
We would hope. We would hope. I think the struggle is that there's like, I haven't seen a whole lot of examples where the movement breaks into a bunch of cells and then the cells recombine again. I think maybe the best example was the ANC. They were talking about the South African anti-apartheid movement. Um, that seemed like that was one of the best examples of that happening. They were actually super flexible. They went from being like a very rigidly structured sort of hierarchical organization to then they were outlawed and they broke into cell structures, and the cells were very effective. Although at the very beginning of our reading here, they were talking about some of the dangerous stuff that came from that. And then eventually the cell structures put enough pressure on the government. The government got rid of legalized them again, I suppose, legalized the ANC, and the ANC recatalyzed, or recombined into a structured organization and ran for office, and they actually won an election just immediately after. So that's a really interesting example of that flexibility existing and persisting.
Right. Do you know of any examples, like where the plan has been, like, before anything happened, the plan was organizational cells, like a large group, and then like a plan for specific cells for, like, if we need to separate, if we need to.
I think that the vibe I was getting, if I'm recalling correctly, and Zan, you can correct me if you recall, was that once pressure began to be put on the ANC, and it was like kind of like serious pressure, they began to develop the cell structure. It wasn't complete, but it was like side by side with the institutional ANC. Do you recall, Zan?
Yeah, I think so, because they were being kind of too overt and chatty about what they were doing, and that almost led to the demise of the group. So they had to, like, they really regrouped and broke into cell to avoid that kind of situation again. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the way I look at it is like kind of what I'm gathering here is best practice is you are as above ground as conceivably possible to start with, and you try to build a movement around your above ground aspect, and you try to be good with vetting, and you try to make sure that the people that are in your core organization are very committed, and then you have a big circle of people that are like sympathizers in the movement. But then eventually they will crack down on you, and when they crack down on you, you have to be ready to cellularize in the process.
Right. I think that's what we're gathering.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it boils down to. And I think that the people who are like your front facing people, they don't go into your cells, because those people are easy to target. And so when you target those people, you are able to target the cells a lot more easily. So like, you know, Nelson Mandela, for example, he like they had to have a firewall between him and the cellular structure, and that was part of what was keeping him safe for a long time and keeping the cells safe. It didn't matter. Eventually, they imprisoned him anyway. But these are the sorts of things that have to be done, and the Black Panthers failed to do this properly. The Black Panthers were just essentially like, fuck it, everybody's a militant. Everybody's gonna need to act like they're part of the military, and send that, just like they didn't have a firewall, and so all they really had to do is target their leaders, and it just absolutely just demolished their organizational structure. Yeah, I also think it was noteworthy here that the Weathermen, they were using this sort of like Maoist, like self-criticism stuff that you see happening a lot in especially like the 60s and 70s. It's very cult-like, very abusive, and it doesn't seem like it really works in creating people who are capable of confronting revolutionary conditions. It seems like more what it does is it just creates people who are subservient cultists who just follow along with whatever hierarchical leadership exists.
Right. Well, it seems like it created some really sneaky, anxious individuals. And that's kind of, I mean, at the very least, I can see that that's what happened. The people that went through these things became really, really invested in it, and very, very sneaky. And so,
Oh yeah. Yeah, like here they say, though they were designed to break down barriers among members, the effect of the sessions was to enhance suspicions and rivalries within the group and to suppress fears and doubts. Raleigh described the CSC as a vicious tool to disgrace people into accepting collective discipline. Dorn wondered years later, I don't know if there's a good Maoism somewhere, but the Maoism that we adopted was stupid and lethal. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds about right. And the thing is that maybe there is a good Maoism somewhere, but wow, pretty much every organization I've ever seen that goes all in on Maoism, this self-crit stuff turns into a weird cultish abuse mechanism.
yeah, I'm not interested in any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I understand why that the Maoists tried to do the self-crit sessions. Like, it seems valuable to develop a place where, like, it's a circle, you all get together, you try to talk through all of your issues. Oh, I didn't like that you did this. Oh, I don't feel like this is a correct way to deal with this problem, or, whatever. It's like almost like a therapeutic circle or something. I get the idea. You
Right.
want to give people a place to like unpack all of their difficulties, their stresses, their disagreements in a healthy way. And also to kind of like improve and move forward in a more productive way from those discussions. I do think there's value in that as a concept, but something about the way that Maoism uses that, it is always abusive. Like, it is rarely a productive tool of self-transformation.
Yeah, I feel like putting somebody, well, when you're doing like a group like that and you are displaying like everything, you're putting everyone on blast in front of everyone else. That just seems much more vulnerable than people need to be. Like it doesn't seem like that's something people can really consent to in such a group, like, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, in the live chat here, the people have have made some comments. Bedazzled Jade says, turns out yelling at somebody for hours on end isn't actually an education. um
They call
As somebody else said, I'm always worried when anarchists suggest struggle sessions. They often do it with the best of intentions, but I don't think there's a really healthy way to use
them.
it politically.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Keep
know
that
what.
in your polycule.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
That's
maybe
not
some
for
polycules
mine.
can test out some methods of doing a struggle session, get back to us and see if they figure something out
Yeah,
that works.
please do.
Yeah, just report back, please.
Well, there's something called conflict bowls, where people that have a conflict together meet with other people that like look at them, try to like figure out, like kind of come to a resolution, like understand where they're coming from and why this conflict is happening. And the people around are, if I understood correctly, I've only been to one, are encouraged to suggest ways to go at the discussion of the conflict differently, or if needed, not so much like how to resolve, like what should be done to resolve the conflict, but like just a maybe more constructive way to go about conflict resolution. And
A
I've been,
mediator, right? An unbiased perspective.
no, well, it's a whole group. There's no one mediator, but it's like a
Mm,
supported conflict resolution between
I
two
see.
people or like more than like whatever numbers. And I've been
I
to
was
one.
imagining a small bowl.
I'm not sure why it's called a bowl, to be honest. But yeah. And I don't know. Yeah,
How did
probably
that one go that
it
you
went
went to?
well. Yeah, it went well. It wasn't. It was
Were
like it was difficult. It was a bit awkward at times. Some of the people seem
uncomfortable
to
sounds good.
come. Yeah, some people come to a resolution. Some of the people not, like, but also conflicts take more than one session. But
Yeah, it's not a single bowl.
exactly, but it's a start, and it wasn't coercive, and no one was yelling. Like,
Good.
conflict's uncomfortable. It's normal, but it's also like it's good practice.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are very conflict avoidant, with
Yes.
reasons, unfortunately. But yeah.
Another part that stood out to me here was all this stuff about the Green Scare. And pretty much all of his
Mm.
mentions of the Green Scare here really emphasized to me how impactful that environmental direct action is. Like direct action on agricultural sources, direct action preventing them from cutting down forests. Like, it's weird. We kind of treat that stuff like it's like pie in the sky hippie stuff, but the government clearly doesn't think so. The government is terrified of that. Like they go all out about this stuff. And I think that the only reason why it's not happening now is because the Green Scare was so militantly all out by the government. And I think that's kind of interesting because it seems like that's really fallen off as a cause these days. And at the worst time, I mean, climate change is way out of control. Yet it seems like we have fewer of these people doing these actions in the modern day. Like this one group,
it's
$80 million of damage. That's wild.
in my dream.
80
Yeah, it's not
million.
No, but
It's not for nothing that it was clamped down so harshly on. And also the FBI has been, I'm trying to find the Intercept article about that, but it's been lobbied like intensely and now cooperating with like huge part of the like animal industry, like beef industry or whatever, to like crack down and like lobbying about like having state anti-terrorism laws that apply to anything related to damages to like animal I forgot what they're called, like animal farms, like
Right.
places where people like mass kill animals for
Factories.
food, yeah, for food or fur and stuff like that. Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, no, they put a ton of terrorism enhancements on the books for any kind of environmental activism, especially stuff that surrounded like farms of any kind. Anything associated with food production, they put huge terrorism enhancements on those. But
It's hilarious to imagine the government being like, all these black people with guns, we can mow these motherfuckers down. But a single man like climbs a tree and like chains himself in there, like, not another Antifa. Oh my God.
yeah, no, this stuff really messes with them, like with the
Good to
Stop Cop
know.
City stuff. The Stop Cop City stuff, there were a bunch of people that were in tree sits out there in the forest. One of them was down on the ground, and when they were trying to raid the encampment, the cops just shot this person. Tortuguita was their name. They just shot him to death before they even began the raid for no reason, literally. They despise environmental activism. It's clearly a threat to them. They know how important that environmental destruction is to their regime. Let's see. Was there anything else to mention? We got 5 minutes left in the session. It's very disappointing to see how many people flip in these stories. Like the majority of people appear to flip. We also saw this in the
It is
Prairie Land
sad.
case. The Prairie Land
The
case.
what case?
Well, there was a
Yeah.
bunch of people who did like a noise demonstration outside of one of the fucking ICE concentration camps, and they like gathered up all of them and then imprisoned them, and even imprisoned somebody that was just like carrying zines it was like barely associated
Yeah,
with them, and carried
in their car. I watched
Yes.
your live stream.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Most of them
Mhm.
flipped. It was like 5 of the 8 flipped or something.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to learn more about police interrogation and maybe like hear from people who have been in the situation of being interrogated more, so that I can learn more about what I'm going to have to go through at some point in my life before I'm put in that situation. God knows I'd rather fucking die than flip.
I would agree with that. Yeah, no, I think a big part of it is that it really cannot be exaggerated to the degree just remaining silent is a big part of it. Like really,
Mhm.
just saying I need my lawyer. No matter what they say, you just say I won't be saying anything. I invoke my 5th Amendment. my right, Fifth Amendment rights. I need to speak with my lawyer. And that's all you say. That's all you say to them. You do not
Well, that
give them
seems
anything.
so simple.
It is.
How did all these people flip?
Well, I think that it's simple in principle until you're talking with them. And it's very difficult when somebody with all that power is sitting there, somebody has your fate in their hands. It's very difficult to tell them no. Like when the FBI came to my door, I knew that I would be able to navigate it in such a way that I wasn't going to incriminate myself or anybody else. But truthfully, if I had done what I should have done, I shouldn't have said anything. I should have said nothing. I should have said, sorry, I have no desire to speak to you today. If you have something you'd like to say to me, I'll arrange a lawyer to speak with you. Something like that. That's what I should have said. Right. But on the spot, I was kind of, they came to my apartment early when I was sleeping. They woke me up. I was groggy and confused. They purposely are gonna try to throw you off kilter. Their whole thing is they want to throw you off kilter into a place where you don't feel like you're like mentally well. And then they're going to put pressure on you, and they're going to emphasize the degree to which they have your fate in their hands. And they're going to convince you that if you cooperate, it'll be better for you. But it's not true. If everybody in the case cooperates, they'll be way better off than if a bunch of you flip. But it feels scary in the moment, like for me, it was less scary. And it was more that it was like, I know what I'm doing. I've got this. But that was also an erroneous way to approach it. I should have just approached it by fucking not telling them that I didn't want to speak with them. Sorry, I have no desire to speak with you. Be on your way. Like that's what I should have done. But yeah, so I can only imagine you're in a fucking interrogation room and they already have got like everybody in the group in prison. It's the prisoner's dilemma,
Yeah, and if people are being accused and going to trial, often I'm guessing I don't know about these cases because it's not mentioned, but like often you're like promised like a reduced sentence for collaborating and stuff like that. Which
yeah, they're bribing you. They're doing the good cop, bad cop thing. They're telling you they're going to do something good for you. They're telling you, oh, we can work this out and all that. They're good at it. They've been doing it for so long. But
sorry, can I just
one
point
last
out
thing? Yeah.
There's the links that I shared in the chat just to make sure people see them.
So the first one is how the FBI and Big Ag started treating animal rights activists as bioterrorists. That is an Intercept article. Then the second one is the case of terrorism law being used. Wait, I guess here's a case of terrorism law used for accusations of liberating minks from fur farms. Yeah, no, exactly. This is the Northumberland 2. So yeah, this stuff is so real. Whoa, they haven't reached their goal yet even. When did this start? Wow, in 2025. Damn.
Yeah, they're going back to court soon on terrorism charges. The RICO charges were dismissed last summer.
Well, I'm glad to hear that at least. I was going to share that real quick. Going to share my screen. Yeah, so if anybody just wants to pull this stuff up, those links are there on the screen, of course, and y'all can just go look at the live stream afterwards. But yeah, no, this is all really important stuff. Appreciate y'all for coming here and being readers, and I appreciate everybody who attended here in the live stream. That is it for this evening, and I'll see y'all later.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye.